You're nothing but an ignorant dirt farmer. Step aside and let the real professionals handle this." Those were the last words the head engineer spoke before watching a simple man in torn overalls accomplish in 5 minutes what their entire team couldn't do in 3 days. But what happened next would shake the very foundation of everything they thought they knew about intelligence, respect, and the power hidden within the most unlikely people. In the heart of rural Tennessee, where the morning mist clings to rolling hills like ancient secrets, there lived a man whose calloused hands held more wisdom than any textbook could teach. His name was Samuel Carter, though most folks just called him Sam. To the outside world, he was nothing more than a poor farmer scratching out a living from stubborn soil. His clothes were patched, his boots worn thin, and his bank account nearly empty. But Sam carried something far more valuable than money, a mind sharp enough to cut through problems like a blade through wheat. The massive agricultural corporation had moved into the valley 6 months earlier, bringing with them gleaming machinery worth millions of dollars. Their flagship harvester, a technological marvel the size of a small house, had broken down right in the middle of harvest season. For 3 agonizing days, their team of engineers, men with expensive degrees and even more expensive suits, had struggled with the machine. They'd flown in specialists from 3 states, consulted with manufacturers overseas, and run diagnostic tests that cost more than Sam's annual income. Yet the behemoth sat silent in the field, as unmovable as a monument to their failure. Sam had watched from his property line as the corporate circus unfolded. He'd seen the frustration growing on their faces, heard the heated phone calls echoing across the valley, witnessed the parade of experts coming and going like actors in some elaborate performance. His neighbors whispered about the delays, about how the corporation's failure might actually help the small farmers for once. But Sam felt something different stirring in his chest. Not satisfaction, but a strange pull, as if the broken machine was calling to him across the morning air. That's when he made the decision that would change everything. Armed with nothing but a toolbox his grandfather had passed down, and the kind of knowledge that comes from a lifetime of making broken things work again, Sam walked across that field toward a confrontation that would expose the dangerous gap between education and wisdom, between assumption and truth. As he approached the crowd of suited executives and frustrated engineers, Sam could hear their conversations, complaints about faulty software, discussions of replacement parts that would take weeks to arrive, mentions of lawsuits and insurance claims. The machine towered above them all, its silence somehow mocking their expertise. When Sam cleared his throat and politely asked if he might take a look, the response was swift and brutal. "This is a $250,000 piece of precision equipment," the head engineer had sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's controlled by computers you've probably never even heard of. I doubt you've ever seen anything more complicated than a rusty plow." But Sam had seen something they hadn't. While they focused on their digital displays and complex diagnostics, he'd noticed the way the machine sat slightly tilted, the subtle signs that spoke of something far simpler than software failure. As their laughter echoed across the field and security guards moved to escort him away, Sam's eyes caught something that made his blood run cold. What he was about to discover wouldn't just fix their machine. It would uncover a secret that powerful people had killed to protect, a truth buried so deep that even he couldn't imagine where it would lead. The next 5 minutes would prove that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes not from those who claim to know everything, but from those humble enough to truly see. And sometimes being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's the most dangerous weapon of all. Before we dive deeper into Sam's incredible story, I want you to imagine something. Picture the person you know who's been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated simply because of how they look or where they come from. Now imagine that person possessing a gift so extraordinary that it could change the world. If only someone would listen. That's exactly what we're about to explore in this remarkable tale. If you're ready to discover how one man's quiet brilliance exposed secrets that powerful forces desperately wanted to keep hidden, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about intelligence, respect, and the incredible power of human observation. Samuel Carter's life had been carved from hardship like sculpture from stone. At 53, he owned 47 acres of Tennessee farmland that his great-grandfather had bought with money earned laying railroad track in the 1880s. The property had been in his family for 4 generations, each one adding their sweat and dreams to soil that seemed to give back just enough to keep hope alive, but never enough to make life easy. Sam's day began at 4:30 every morning, not by choice but by necessity. The old rooster that served as his alarm clock had died 3 years earlier, but his internal clock had learned to wake him anyway. He'd dress in the same type of clothes he'd worn for 20 years. Sturdy jeans that had been mended more times than replaced. A flannel shirt soft from countless washings and work boots that had molded to his feet like old friends. His breakfast was usually black coffee and whatever was left from the night before, eaten while standing at his kitchen window, watching the sun paint the eastern hills gold. The farm itself told the story of a man who made everything last. His tractor was a 1987 Ford that he'd bought secondhand and kept running through pure determination and mechanical intuition. His barn had been patched with materials salvaged from 3 different decades. Some boards from the original structure his great-grandfather built, others from a neighbor's demolished shed, and still others from his own creative problem-solving. The roof leaked in 2 places, but Sam had positioned buckets with the precision of an architect, and somehow the water always found its way to where he needed it to go. What most people didn't know about Sam was that he'd graduated valedictorian from his high school class 35 years earlier. He'd been accepted to engineering programs at 3 universities, full scholarships waiting for him like open doors to a different life. But then his father had his first heart attack, and Sam made the choice that defined his character. He stayed home. He worked the farm, cared for his parents until they passed, and somehow never found his way back to those abandoned dreams. Yet the mind that had earned those scholarships never stopped working. It simply found different problems to solve. Over the decades, Sam had become the valley's unofficial fix-it expert. When Mrs. Henderson's well pump failed in the middle of winter, Sam diagnosed a problem that had stumped 2 professional repair companies. When the local volunteer fire department couldn't figure out why their new truck kept stalling, Sam spent an afternoon under the hood and had it purring like a cat. He never charged for this help, never boasted about his successes, and never seemed to expect recognition for his quiet genius. His neighbors knew they could count on him, but even they didn't fully grasp the scope of his abilities. Sam read technical manuals the way other people read novels. He subscribed to engineering journals and agricultural publications, teaching himself about advances in technology that most people assumed were beyond his understanding. His kitchen table was often covered with sketches and calculations, ideas for improvements that could revolutionize farming if anyone with resources cared to listen. But Sam lived in a world where appearance mattered more than ability, where a college degree carried more weight than decades of experience, where the cut of your clothes determined the respect you received. He'd learned to keep his ideas to himself, to offer help quietly and step back when the credit was handed out. The world had taught him that his opinions weren't valued, that his insights weren't welcome in rooms where real decisions were made. This acceptance of his place in the social order wasn't bitterness. It was something deeper and more dangerous. It was the patient wisdom of a man who understood that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage of all. While others announced their expertise, Sam simply observed. While they argued about theories, he noticed details. While they demanded respect, he earned trust through action. The morning everything changed started like any other. Sam had finished his chores early and was repairing a section of fence when he heard the commotion from the corporate farm. The sound of frustrated voices carried across the valley like distant thunder. He could see the crowd gathered around their massive harvester, could sense the growing tension in their gestures and movements. For 3 days he'd watched their struggle with the kind of detached interest a master craftsman might show, while watching apprentices fumble with tools they didn't understand. What Sam couldn't have known was that his decision to walk across that field would set in motion a chain of events that would expose corruption, reaching the highest levels of government, reveal a conspiracy that had been decades in the making, and ultimately prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone assumes is harmless. The story you're about to hear isn't just about fixing a machine. It's about the moment when quiet competence meets arrogant incompetence, when hidden wisdom challenges accepted authority, and when one man's courage to speak truth to power unleashes consequences that no one, not even Sam himself, could have predicted. As Sam approached the gathered crowd of corporate executives and engineers, he could feel the weight of their stares like physical pressure against his chest. The massive harvester loomed before them, its yellow paint gleaming in the morning sun, a monument to modern agricultural technology that had fallen silent at the worst possible time. The machine was worth more than Sam's entire farm, equipped with GPS navigation, automated systems, and computer diagnostics that could allegedly pinpoint problems down to the smallest component. The head engineer, Dr. Marcus Webb, was a man in his 40s whose expensive suit and polished shoes had never seen a day of real farm work. He stood surrounded by his team, tablet in hand, gesturing at diagnostic readouts with the frustrated energy of someone whose expertise was being challenged by an inanimate object. When Sam cleared his throat and asked permission to examine the machine, the response was immediate and cutting. "Sir, I appreciate your concern," Webb said, not bothering to hide his condescension. "But this equipment requires specialized knowledge of hydraulic systems, computerized controls, and precision electronics. Unless you have an engineering degree and certification in agricultural machinery, I'm afraid you'd just be wasting everyone's time." The other engineers chuckled, sharing knowing looks that excluded Sam completely. One of them, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses, muttered something about local color that drew more quiet laughter. Sam felt the familiar sting of dismissal, the automatic assumption that his worn clothes and calloused hands disqualified him from having anything valuable to contribute. But something strange happened in that moment of humiliation. As Sam's eyes moved across the massive machine, he noticed details that the trained engineers had missed. The hydraulic fluid reservoir was slightly fuller than it should have been. The machine sat with a barely perceptible tilt to the left. Most telling of all, there was a faint stain on the ground near the right rear wheel. Not oil or hydraulic fluid, but something darker, something that looked almost like dried blood. "I understand your concerns," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying the patient tone of a man accustomed to being underestimated. "But sometimes the simplest problems hide behind the most complex symptoms. Mind if I just take a quick look underneath?" Webb's expression hardened. "Absolutely not. This machine is under warranty, and any unauthorized tampering could void our coverage. Security," he called to two guards standing nearby. "Please escort this gentleman back to his property." As the security guards moved toward him, Sam's eyes caught something that made his blood freeze. Partially hidden beneath the massive rear wheel was the edge of what looked like a piece of fabric. Blue denim, the same color as the work shirt worn by Jake Morrison, a local farmer who'd been reported missing 3 days earlier. Jake had been one of the most vocal opponents of the corporate farm's expansion into the valley, organizing meetings and circulating petitions to limit their operations. The realization hit Sam like a physical blow. This wasn't a mechanical failure at all. The machine hadn't broken down. It had been deliberately shut down to hide evidence of something far more sinister. The corporate engineers weren't trying to fix the harvester. They were trying to figure out how to move it without revealing what lay beneath. "Wait," Sam said, his voice carrying a new urgency. "Before you move that machine, you need to know something important." Webb turned back with visible irritation. "Mr. Carter, Sam Carter, and I think your machine isn't broken. I think it's been parked exactly where it is on purpose." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Sam could see the subtle change in Webb's expression, the way his eyes sharpened with something that might have been fear. The other engineers had stopped their casual conversations, suddenly focused on this dirt farmer who was speaking as if he knew something they didn't. "That's ridiculous," Webb said, but his voice lacked its previous confidence. "Our diagnostics clearly show multiple system failures. The hydraulics are compromised, the computer systems are offline, and the engine won't turn over. These are complex mechanical problems, not some conspiracy theory." But Sam was studying the faces around him now, reading body language the way he read the weather. He saw how 3 of the engineers avoided eye contact, how Webb's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, how the security guards had positioned themselves not to escort Sam away, but to block his view of the machine's undercarriage. "Jake Morrison," Sam said quietly, and the effect was immediate and dramatic. Webb's face went pale. One of the engineers dropped his tablet, sending it clattering across the ground. The security guards exchanged glances that spoke of shared secrets and dangerous knowledge. "I don't know what you're talking about," Webb said, but his voice cracked on the words. "Jake went missing 3 days ago," Sam continued, his tone steady despite the racing of his heart. "Same day your machine broke down. Funny coincidence, don't you think? Especially since Jake was planning to file a complaint with the EPA about your company's waste disposal practices." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Sam could see the wheels turning in Webb's mind, could almost watch the engineer calculating risks and options. The morning sun seemed to grow hotter, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out as if warning of danger ahead. "You're way out of line here, farmer," one of the security guards said, his hand moving to rest on something at his belt. "Maybe you should head home before you say something you'll regret." But Sam had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He'd seen too much, understood too much, and now he was standing in the middle of something far more dangerous than a simple mechanical failure. As he looked around at the faces surrounding him, some hostile, some fearful, all now viewing him as a threat rather than a nuisance, Sam realized that his quiet life of fixing broken things had just led him to discover something that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. The strange occurrence wasn't the machine breaking down. It was a simple farmer seeing through a carefully constructed lie and having the courage to speak the truth, even when that truth put his own life in immediate danger. The standoff stretched like a taut wire across the morning air. Sam stood facing a semicircle of corporate representatives who had transformed from dismissive professionals into something far more dangerous. The casual arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the cold calculation of people protecting secrets worth killing for. Webb's hand moved to his phone, not to call technical support, but to make the kind of call that would ensure Sam Carter never spoke about what he'd discovered. "Now hold on," Sam said, raising his hands in a gesture that appeared peaceful but was actually strategic. His 35 years of farm work had taught him to read dangerous situations. When cattle were about to charge, when weather was about to turn violent, when predators were preparing to strike. Every instinct he possessed was screaming that he was in mortal danger. "You've gotten yourself involved in something way beyond your understanding, Mr. Carter," Webb said, his voice now carrying the cold authority of a man accustomed to making problems disappear. Sometimes curious people find more than they bargained for. But Sam's mind was racing ahead of the immediate threat. If Jake Morrison was indeed under that machine, there would be evidence, blood, DNA, witness accounts of his last known location. More importantly, if these people were willing to commit murder to protect their operations, there had to be something bigger at stake than just a corporate farm's expansion plans. "You know what I think?" Sam said, taking a calculated step backward toward his own property line. "I think Jake stumbled onto something a lot more serious than waste disposal violations. I think he found out about the real reason you chose this particular valley for your operations." Webb's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," Sam admitted, "but I know soil composition. Been working this land my whole life. And I know that your company didn't choose this location for its farming potential. The drainage is poor, the mineral content is all wrong for most crops, and you're too far from major transportation routes to make economic sense." He was buying time now, letting his mind work the problem like he would any broken piece of machinery. Find the real malfunction, trace it back to its source, understand the system before attempting a repair. The corporate team had fanned out slightly, trying to surround him without being obvious about it. "But you know what this valley does have?" Sam continued, his voice growing stronger as the pieces fell into place. "It has the perfect geological conditions for something else entirely. The limestone formations underground, the natural water table, the isolation. This isn't about farming at all, is it?" Webb made a subtle gesture to one of the security guards, who began moving to cut off Sam's retreat route. But Sam had spent his entire life outmaneuvering animals that weighed 10 times more than he did, and had fewer moral constraints than corporate executives. "Jake found out about the storage facility, didn't he?" Sam pressed on, his voice carrying across the field like an accusation echoing through a courtroom. "Underground storage, probably for waste too dangerous to dispose of legally. That's why you needed this specific location, and that's why Jake had to be silenced when he got too close to the truth." The effect of these words was electric. Webb's composure cracked completely, and he made a slashing motion across his throat, a signal that was unmistakably clear in its intent. The security guards began moving with purpose now, abandoning any pretense of casual positioning. But Sam had one advantage these city-bred professionals couldn't match. He knew every inch of this terrain. As the net began to tighten around him, he spotted Mrs. Patterson's car turning onto the access road that served both properties. Eleanor Patterson was 78 years old, had taught school for 45 years, and possessed the kind of moral courage that made her dangerous to people with secrets. "Mrs. Patterson," Sam called out, waving his arms to attract her attention. "Could you come here for a minute? I think these folks might need some help with their broken harvester." The elderly woman's sharp eyes took in the scene immediately. The corporate representatives, the positioned security guards, the tension thick enough to cut. Eleanor Patterson had lived through the Depression, 2 wars, and 6 decades of small-town politics. She could smell trouble from 3 counties away. "Why, Sam Carter, what's all this commotion about?" she asked loudly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never backed down from a fight in her life. Webb made a desperate calculation. Threatening a lone farmer was one thing, but harming an elderly woman in broad daylight with potential witnesses was entirely another matter. The situation had spun beyond his control, and he could see it slipping further with each passing second. "There's been a misunderstanding," Webb said, forcing his voice back into professional tones. "Mr. Carter here was trying to help with our mechanical difficulties, but this is specialized equipment that requires certified technicians." "Is that so?" Mrs. Patterson replied, her tone suggesting she wasn't buying a word of it. "Well, Sam's fixed every piece of broken machinery in this valley for the past 20 years. If he can't figure out your problem, it probably can't be fixed." She paused, studying the faces around her with the keen insight of someone who had taught teenagers for 4 decades. Unless, of course, the problem isn't mechanical at all. The old teacher had just thrown Sam a lifeline, and he grabbed it with both hands. "Mrs. Patterson, I was just telling these gentlemen about Jake Morrison. You haven't seen him around lately, have you? His wife's been worried sick since he didn't come home 3 nights ago." "Jake Morrison?" Mrs. Patterson's voice rose with genuine concern. "Why, he was supposed to come by Tuesday to help me with my garden tiller. Never showed up, which isn't like Jake at all. He's the most reliable man in the county." Her eyes sharpened as she looked at the massive harvester. "You don't suppose he could have had an accident around all this heavy machinery, do you?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Webb realized that what had started as a simple cleanup operation had now involved 2 witnesses who were connecting dots he desperately needed to keep separate. But Sam wasn't finished yet. He was just getting started. Mrs. Patterson's question about Jake Morrison having an accident around heavy machinery changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Webb's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely, and Sam could see the desperate calculation in the engineer's eyes. This was the moment when everything would either unravel or explode into violence, and Sam knew he had perhaps seconds to make the right choice. "You know what, Mrs. Patterson?" Sam said, his voice carrying newfound authority. "I think you're absolutely right to be concerned. In fact, I think we should call Sheriff Hendricks right now and ask him to take a look under this machine, just to make sure Jake didn't have any kind of accident." "That won't be necessary," Webb said quickly, but his voice had lost all pretense of professional calm. "We've already checked the area thoroughly. There's nothing to see." "Then you won't mind if we take another look," Mrs. Patterson said, pulling out her cell phone with the determination of someone who had dealt with more than her share of bullies over the decades. "I'm calling Tom Hendricks right now." "Stop," Webb shouted, and suddenly there was a gun in his hand. Not the security guard's weapon, but a small pistol he'd been concealing in his jacket. Nobody's calling anyone. The transformation was complete. The sophisticated engineer was gone, replaced by a cornered criminal who had just revealed the depths of the conspiracy Sam had stumbled upon. Mrs. Patterson gasped, but her hand remained steady on her phone. "Now that," Sam said quietly, "is exactly what an innocent man with a broken harvester would do. Pull a gun on his neighbors for offering to help." But Sam's mind was working furiously beyond the immediate danger. Webb's panic confirmed everything. Jake Morrison was under that machine, and his death was connected to something far bigger than anyone had imagined. The underground storage facility Sam had theorized about was real, and it was valuable enough to kill for. "Here's what's going to happen," Webb said, his voice shaking but his gun steady. "Both of you are going to walk away from here and forget everything you think you've seen. This is a matter of national security, and there are forces involved that you couldn't possibly understand." "National security?" Mrs. Patterson laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Son, I've been hearing that excuse for 78 years. It's what people say when they're doing something they know is wrong, but they're too cowardly to admit it." Sam was studying the terrain around them, calculating distances and possibilities. The harvester was positioned at the edge of a slight depression in the field, where natural drainage would collect water during heavy rains. If he was right about what lay beneath, the evidence would be more than just Jake's body. There would be contaminated soil, leaked chemicals, maybe even documentation of the illegal storage operation. "You made one mistake," Sam told Webb, his voice calm despite the gun pointed at his chest. "You assumed that killing Jake would end the problem, but Jake was smarter than you gave him credit for. He didn't just discover your operation, he documented it." It was a bluff, but Webb's reaction told Sam he'd hit close to the mark. The engineer's eyes widened with something approaching panic. "That's impossible. We searched his property, his vehicle, everything." "Did you search his locker at the grain elevator?" Sam pressed, the lie flowing smoothly from his lips. "Or his safety deposit box at First National?" Jake was a careful man, Webb. He knew exactly what kind of people he was dealing with. Mrs. Patterson caught on immediately. "Oh yes, Jake mentioned that to me just last week. Said he had some important papers in safekeeping. Insurance, he called it. The fiction was building momentum, and Sam could see Webb beginning to believe it. But more importantly, he could see the other engineers and security guards starting to doubt their leader's judgment. Killing 2 local residents to cover up a murder was spiraling beyond anything they'd signed up for. "This is insane," one of the younger engineers muttered. "Marcus, this isn't what we agreed to. You said it was just about moving some industrial waste, not killing people." "Shut up," Webb snapped. But the damage was done. The conspiracy was fracturing in real time, each member beginning to calculate their own survival over the group's success. Sam seized the moment. "Industrial waste? Is that what he told you? That explains the storage facility, but not the security measures, not the armed guards and the cover-up. What kind of industrial waste requires this level of secrecy?" The answer came not from Webb, but from his own realization as he studied the landscape with new understanding. The specific location, the geological requirements, the national security claims. This wasn't just about illegal dumping. "Nuclear waste," Sam said, and the words fell like stones into still water. "You're storing nuclear waste in our valley. That's why you needed the limestone formations, the isolated location, the complete secrecy." Webb's gun wavered as the full scope of the exposure became clear. This wasn't just about corporate malfeasance or even murder. It was about a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, involving materials dangerous enough to contaminate the entire region for generations. "The government contracted you to dispose of waste from weapons programs," Sam continued, the pieces falling into place with terrifying clarity. "Probably told you it was temporary, a stopgap solution while they found permanent storage. But temporary became permanent. And now you've got tons of radioactive material sitting in underground caverns that were never designed for long-term storage." Mrs. Patterson's face had gone white. "My God, Sam. The cancer cluster in the next county over. The unusual number of birth defects. The livestock deaths that nobody could explain." The engineers' team was backing away now, understanding for the first time the true scope of what they'd been involved in. But Webb still held the gun, and Sam could see in his eyes the desperate calculation of a man with no good options left. The climax had arrived, and everything, the lives of everyone in the valley, the exposure of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power, the truth about Jake Morrison's murder, hung in the balance of the next few seconds. The standoff lasted only moments longer, but those moments stretched like hours in Sam's memory. Webb, realizing that his conspiracy had unraveled beyond any hope of containment, made one final, desperate choice. Instead of pulling the trigger, he turned the gun on himself, understanding that he'd rather face death than the consequences of what he'd been part of. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder, and in that terrible sound, decades of lies and cover-ups came crashing down. The investigation that followed would eventually expose one of the largest environmental conspiracies in American history. Jake Morrison's body was indeed found beneath the harvester, but his death led to the discovery of something far more sinister, an illegal nuclear waste storage facility that had been contaminating groundwater for over a decade. The cancer clusters, the livestock deaths, the mysterious illnesses that had plagued the region, all traced back to a government contract gone horribly wrong, and a corporation willing to sacrifice an entire community for profit. Sam Carter, the ignorant dirt farmer who had been dismissed and mocked, became the unlikely hero who brought down a network of corruption that extended from corporate boardrooms to federal agencies. His simple observation about soil composition and geological formations had unraveled secrets that teams of investigators had missed. The respect that had been denied to him for so long came flooding back. But by then, Sam had learned that the opinion that mattered most was his own. Mrs. Patterson, who had lived through nearly 8 decades of American history, said it best during the congressional hearings that followed. The most dangerous thing about prejudice isn't what it does to the people being dismissed. It's what it does to the people doing the dismissing. When you decide someone isn't worth listening to based on how they look or where they come from, you might just miss the most important truth you'll ever hear. The corporate farm was shut down within months. The cleanup of the contaminated site took years and cost millions of dollars. Families affected by the contamination received settlements, though no amount of money could truly compensate for the health problems and lives lost. The government officials who had authorized the illegal storage faced congressional investigation and criminal charges. But perhaps the most profound change was in how the community saw itself and its members. Sam's expertise was no longer hidden or dismissed. He was appointed to the Environmental Oversight Committee that managed the cleanup, and his insights proved invaluable in understanding the scope of the contamination. More importantly, his story became a reminder that wisdom doesn't always come dressed in expensive suits or carrying impressive credentials. The harvester itself became an unintended monument to the power of observation and the courage to speak truth to authority. It was eventually removed and disposed of as contaminated waste, but not before serving as evidence in dozens of legal proceedings. Every time Sam drove past the empty field where it had stood, he remembered the moment when everything changed. Not when he fixed a machine that wasn't really broken, but when he saw through a lie that everyone else had accepted. Today, Sam still farms his 47 acres in Tennessee. His equipment is still older and more patched than his neighbors, and his clothes are still worn from honest work. But he carries himself differently now, with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that respect is earned through integrity, not appearance, and that sometimes the most important knowledge comes not from textbooks, but from a lifetime of paying attention to the world around you. The story of the farmer who knew too much isn't really about nuclear waste or corporate conspiracies. It's about the danger of judging people by surface appearances, about the wisdom that can be found in unexpected places, and about the courage it takes to speak truth when everyone around you prefers comfortable lies. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think differently about the people around you who might be carrying hidden wisdom, I want you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment telling me about a time when you or someone you know was underestimated because of appearances. Because Sam Carter's story reminds us that sometimes the most profound truths come from the quietest voices, and sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one everyone should be listening to. The next time you meet someone the world has dismissed as simple or ignorant, remember Sam Carter and ask yourself, what might I learn if I actually listened?